When I arrived at my sister's engagement party, the security guard sent me to the service entrance. She didn't know I owned the hotel or that the groom's family was about to learn it the hard way. My name is Victoria Matthews, and I hadn't seen my family in 2 years. Not since they decided my online business was embarrassing compared to my sister Emma's corporate job. What they didn't know was that my little online venture had grown into a $50 million hotel empire, and Emma's engagement party was happening in my flagship property. The security guard looked me up and down, taking in my jeans and sneakers, and shook her head. "Staff entrance is around back. You're late for your shift." I could have corrected her. I could have shown my ID and waltzed through the front door. Instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you." Because sometimes the best way to see who people really are is to let them think you're nobody important. What I discovered in that kitchen would destroy not just Emma's perfect engagement, but expose a web of lies that reached far beyond my family. The groom's prestigious parents were bankrupt. Emma had been terrorizing staff for weeks. And the check for this entire party? It was about to bounce. But they had no idea that the woman peeling shrimp in their kitchen owned everything they were trying to impress people with. But what I discovered in the hotel's security office would reveal that the Ashford family's deception went far deeper than I could have imagined. After my conversation with Marcus, I excused myself from the kitchen, claiming I needed a bathroom break. Instead, I took the service elevator to the 3rd floor, where my personal office was located behind an unmarked door. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sneaking around my own building like a spy. My office had a direct feed to every security camera in the hotel, plus access to all financial records, guest information, and staff communications. As the owner of Grand Meridian Hotels, I'd installed these systems to protect both guests and employees. I never imagined I'd be using them to investigate my own sister's engagement party. I settled behind my mahogany desk, the same one where I'd signed the acquisition papers for our 15th hotel just last month, and pulled up the security feeds from the ballroom. What I saw made my stomach turn with a mixture of disgust and fascination. The party was in full swing, with about 60 guests mingling around tables decorated with white orchids and gold accents. Emma looked stunning in her champagne-colored cocktail dress, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She was every inch the successful corporate executive, commanding attention as she moved through the crowd. But it was the dynamics I observed that made everything click into place. Emma's behavior toward the staff was even worse than Marcus had described, but what the security cameras revealed about the Ashford family would shock me to my core. Mrs. Patricia Ashford, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the kind of rigid posture that screamed old money, was systematically cornering different guests. I turned up the audio feed and listened as she spoke to Dr. Hamilton, one of Dad's golf partners. "Of course, we're thrilled about the engagement," Mrs. Ashford was saying, her voice carrying the practiced modulation of someone used to being heard. "Though between you and me, we do have some concerns about Emma's background." Dr. Hamilton looked uncomfortable. "She seems like a lovely young woman, very accomplished." "Oh, she's charming enough," Mrs. Ashford continued, taking a sip of champagne. "But you understand how important family reputation is. The Matthews family is, well, let's just say they're not quite our usual circle." I felt my jaw clench as I watched this woman systematically poison people against my family while accepting their hospitality. But I forced myself to keep watching, sensing there was more to uncover. Mr. Charles Ashford, a distinguished-looking man with prematurely white hair and an expensive suit, was having his own conversation near the bar. He was speaking quietly to someone I didn't recognize, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting server's uniform. "The timeline is crucial," Mr. Ashford was saying. "The incident needs to happen during the toast, when all the cameras are focused on the happy couple. Can you guarantee the coordination?" The nervous man nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir. The kitchen mishap will happen exactly at 8:30, just like you requested. The sprinkler system malfunction will follow 30 seconds later. My blood ran cold as I realized the Ashfords weren't just snobbish, they were actively sabotaging Emma's engagement party. I quickly switched to different camera angles, trying to piece together the full scope of their plan. In the ladies' room, I caught Mrs. Ashford rummaging through Emma's purse while Emma was touching up her makeup in the mirror, oblivious to what was happening behind her. Mrs. Ashford was photographing credit cards, taking pictures of personal documents, even copying phone numbers from Emma's contact list. When Emma turned around, Mrs. Ashford was already standing innocently by the sinks, washing her hands. "Your family seems lovely," Mrs. Ashford said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, dear, what does your sister Victoria do for work again? Brett mentioned she's some sort of entrepreneur?" Emma's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Even through the camera, I could see her discomfort with the topic. "Victoria has a small online business," Emma replied carefully. "Nothing too exciting. She sells things on the internet." "How modern," Mrs. Ashford said with barely concealed disdain. "And she's been quite successful with this internet venture?" Emma's laugh was forced. "She does all right for herself. Actually, she's been incredibly generous. She's contributing significantly to our wedding fund, very family-oriented." The lie hit me like a physical blow. Emma was claiming I was funding her wedding while simultaneously dismissing my business as unimportant. I switched cameras again, this time focusing on Brett Ashford, the groom-to-be. He was talking animatedly with my cousin Jake near the dance floor, seemingly oblivious to his parents' machinations. "Emma's amazing," Brett was saying, his face lighting up with genuine affection. "She works so hard, and she's built this incredible career from nothing. Her family raised her to value achievement and integrity." Jake nodded approvingly. "The Matthews have always been good people, Victoria especially. That girl's got a head for business like you wouldn't believe." "I can't wait to meet her," Brett replied. "Emma talks about her sister all the time. Apparently, Victoria's built this hugely successful company, but she's super private about it. Emma says she's one of those quiet millionaires who doesn't like attention." The irony was staggering. Brett genuinely admired me based on Emma's stories, while his parents were planning to sabotage the party, and his mother was literally stealing personal information. I pulled up the hotel's financial records, specifically looking for the Ashford account. What I found made everything make sense in the worst possible way. The deposit for the engagement party had bounced, twice. The Ashford family had given us a check for $53,000 to cover the venue, catering, flowers, music, and service. The first attempt to process it had failed due to insufficient funds. When our accounting department contacted them, Charles Ashford had claimed it was a bank error and provided a new account number. That check had also bounced. According to our records, the Ashfords now owed the hotel $53,000, plus insufficient funds fees totaling another $1,200. Our legal department had already sent 2 notices, both of which had been ignored, but the financial records revealed something even more devastating about the Ashford family's true situation. I accessed our database of corporate accounts and ran a search on Ashford Industries, the manufacturing company that Charles supposedly ran. What I found was a masterclass in financial deception. Ashford Industries had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 4 months ago. The company, which had once manufactured high-end automotive parts, had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Charles had been using company funds to maintain their lifestyle while the business collapsed around him. Their Beacon Hill mansion, mortgaged to the hilt, and currently in foreclosure proceedings. The yacht Brett had mentioned during dinner last month, repossessed by the bank 6 weeks ago. Mrs. Ashford's jewelry collection, which she'd been showing off to Emma's friends. Most of it had been sold to keep up appearances, replaced with convincing replicas. The Ashfords weren't just broke. They were desperately seeking a financially stable daughter-in-law to keep them afloat. Emma's corporate salary and her successful entrepreneur sister made her the perfect target. If you're loving this revelation about the Ashford family's deception, smash that like button right now. And you absolutely need to subscribe, because what Victoria does with this information next will leave you speechless. I leaned back in my chair, processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My sister was being courted by a family of con artists who were actively sabotaging her engagement party while planning to use her financially. Meanwhile, she was taking credit for my success while dismissing my achievements. The security monitor chimed with an incoming message from my head of security, David Rodriguez. Ms. Matthews, we have a situation developing in the ballroom. Should I intervene? I switched to the main ballroom camera and saw what David meant. The nervous man who'd been talking to Charles Ashford was now in the kitchen, and something was clearly going wrong with whatever they'd planned. Instead of a controlled mishap, there was genuine chaos. Smoke was billowing from the main preparation area, and I could see staff members rushing around with fire extinguishers. The sprinkler system hadn't activated as planned. It had malfunctioned catastrophically, soaking not just the kitchen, but flooding into the main dining area. Guests were scrambling away from the spreading water, their elegant outfits ruined. Emma stood frozen in the center of it all, watching her perfect party dissolve into chaos. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the universe has its own sense of justice. Mrs. Ashford, in her panic to escape the flooding, slipped on the wet marble floor. Her purse flew open, scattering its contents across the ballroom. Among the items that spilled out were Emma's credit cards, which Mrs. Ashford had stolen from her purse, along with several pieces of jewelry that I recognized from the hotel's Lost and Found. The woman had been stealing from guests all evening. Dr. Hamilton, who'd been subjected to Mrs. Ashford's condescending comments about Emma's family, bent down to help gather the scattered items. His expression changed as he recognized Emma's American Express card. "Patricia," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "why do you have Emma's credit cards?" The question cut through the chaos like a knife. Emma spun around, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally, fury. "Those are mine," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom despite the commotion. "I was looking for them earlier. How did you get them?" Mrs. Ashford's face went from pale to red to an ashen gray. There must be some mistake. I was helping you." "Helping me by taking my credit cards from my purse?" Emma's voice was rising, and other guests were beginning to gather around the scene. The moment when Mrs. Ashford's facade cracked completely would be seared into everyone's memory. "You little gold digger," Mrs. Ashford suddenly snarled, her mask of aristocratic politeness completely abandoned. "You think you can trap my son with your trashy family and your pathetic attempts at sophistication?" The ballroom went silent except for the sound of water still dripping from the malfunctioning sprinklers. Even the staff had stopped moving, everyone frozen by the sudden explosion of venom. Emma took a step backward, shock written across her face. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Mrs. Ashford continued, apparently past caring about appearances. "We know all about your family, your father's gambling debts, your mother's drinking problem, your sister's failed little internet shop. Did you really think we'd let our son marry into your mess?" Every word was a lie, but they revealed exactly what the Ashfords thought of my family. Brett appeared beside Emma, water dripping from his hair, his face a mask of horror. "Mother, what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're leaving," Mrs. Ashford declared. "This entire evening has been a disaster, and I won't stand here and pretend otherwise." "You're leaving?" Emma's voice was small, confused. "But this is our engagement party." Charles Ashford materialized beside his wife, grabbing her arm. "Patricia, that's enough." "No, Charles, it's not enough," she snapped. "I'm tired of pretending this girl is suitable for our family. Look at this disaster. This is what happens when you try to have a party at some cheap hotel instead of a proper venue." That was my breaking point. The moment when I decided to reveal who I really was would change everything for everyone in that ballroom. I stood up from my desk, straightened my jeans and t-shirt, and headed for the door. It was time for the Ashford family to learn exactly whose cheap hotel they were insulting. The walk from my office to the ballroom took 3 minutes, but it felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. I could hear the continued commotion before I even entered, voices raised in argument, the shuffle of people trying to navigate around puddles, the general chaos of a party gone completely wrong. When I pushed through the ballroom doors, the first person to notice me was Marcus from the kitchen. His eyes widened in recognition, and I saw him nudge Sophia, who immediately started whispering to other staff members. The whispers spread through the service staff like wildfire, but the guests were too focused on the drama to pay attention to another woman in casual clothes entering through the main doors. I walked steadily toward the center of the chaos, where Emma stood dripping and humiliated while Mrs. Ashford continued her tirade. "And another thing," Mrs. Ashford was saying, pointing an accusatory finger at Emma. "We know your sister isn't some successful entrepreneur. We had her investigated. She runs a little crafts business out of her apartment. The idea that she's contributing to your wedding is laughable." That was when I stepped into the circle and spoke the words that would detonate like a bomb in that ballroom. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the space, "I think there's been some confusion about my sister's business." Every head turned toward me. Emma's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't even realized I was at the party. Brett looked confused but interested. The Ashfords looked annoyed at the interruption. "And who exactly are you?" Mrs. Ashford demanded imperiously. I smiled, the same polite smile I'd been wearing all evening while peeling shrimp in the kitchen they thought I worked in. "I'm Victoria Matthews," I said simply. "Emma's sister, the one with the little internet business." The recognition dawning on Emma's face was almost worth everything I'd been through that evening. "Victoria?" Emma's voice cracked. "You're here? But I didn't see you come in." "I came through the service entrance," I said, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "Your security team thought I was staff. I didn't bother to correct them." Mrs. Ashford looked me up and down dismissively. "Well, that explains the attire. I suppose you're not used to formal events." What I said next would wipe that condescending expression off her face permanently. "You're right," I agreed pleasantly. "I'm not used to formal events. I'm usually too busy running the company that owns this hotel and the 14 other Grand Meridian properties across the country." The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop in the next room. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched as the information processed through the crowd like a slow-motion explosion. Emma's mouth fell open. Brett's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Mrs. Ashford's face went through a remarkable transformation from condescending superiority to dawning horror. "That's impossible," Mrs. Ashford finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it?" I replied, pulling out my phone. "David, could you please come to the ballroom and bring the property ownership documents?" Within 30 seconds, David Rodriguez appeared at my side, carrying a leather portfolio. He was a tall, professional man in his 40s who'd been with Grand Meridian since our third hotel acquisition. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced to the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to handling VIP situations, "I'd like you to meet Ms. Victoria Matthews, founder and CEO of Grand Meridian Hotels." But what happened next would prove that some people refuse to accept reality, even when it's staring them in the face. "This is ridiculous, Charles Ashford sputtered, stepping forward. "Some kind of elaborate joke. A hotel chain owner doesn't dress like Like what, Mr. Ashford?" I asked quietly. "Like someone who worked her way up from nothing? Like someone who doesn't need to prove her worth through designer clothes and stolen jewelry?" Mrs. Ashford's hand instinctively went to her necklace, and I saw her face pale as she realized I somehow knew about her theft. David opened the portfolio and began distributing documents to several guests. These are the incorporation papers for Grand Meridian Hotels, filed in Delaware in 2018. Ms. Matthews holds 87% ownership, with the remaining 13% distributed among key employees as profit sharing. Dr. Hamilton, still holding Emma's stolen credit cards, examined the documents with the careful attention of someone who'd reviewed many business contracts. "This appears to be legitimate, Earl," he announced. "Victoria Matthews, founder and CEO, current valuation—" He paused, his eyebrows shooting up. $53 million. The number hit the crowd like a physical force, but Emma's reaction would break my heart. Emma was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something deeper. Something that looked like grief. "53 million, she whispered. "You never—" "Why didn't you tell us?" "When would I have told you?" I asked gently. "When you introduced me to your friends as your sister who plays around with internet stuff. When Mom asked if I'd finally found a real job. When Dad suggested I might want to consider going back to school for something more practical." Brett stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. "Emma always talks about you. She says you're incredibly successful, that you're helping with the wedding fund." "I am helping with the wedding fund," I said, pulling out my personal checkbook. "In fact, I paid for this entire party." I held up the check I'd written that afternoon to cover the Ashford family's bounced payments. All $53,000 of it. The revelation that I'd been bankrolling the very party where I'd been treated like staff would be remembered by everyone present. Mrs. Ashford made a sound like a strangled gasp. Charles went ashen as he realized their financial deception had been discovered. "You see," I continued, addressing the crowd, but keeping my eyes on the Ashfords, "when the hotel's accounting department called about the bounced checks for this event, they contacted me directly, as the owner. I assumed it was an honest mistake, so I covered the costs myself. I didn't want Emma's special day to be ruined." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "The checks bounced, but the Ashfords said—" "The Ashfords," I interrupted gently, "have been lying to you about a lot of things." I nodded to David, who produced another set of documents from his portfolio. "These are public bankruptcy records for Ashford Industries filed 4 months ago. The company has been insolvent for 3 years. Their Beacon Hill mansion is currently in foreclosure. Their yacht was repossessed 6 weeks ago." But the most damning evidence was yet to come. "And this," I said, as David handed me a tablet displaying security footage, "is video of Mrs. Ashford stealing from Emma's purse in the ladies' room approximately 1 hour ago." I turned the tablet so the nearby guests could see the crystal-clear footage of Mrs. Ashford rifling through Emma's belongings, photographing credit cards and personal documents. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone gasped audibly. Dr. Hamilton shook his head in disgust. Brett stared at the footage, then at his mother, his face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and finally anger. "Mother, please tell me this isn't what it looks like." Mrs. Ashford's composure finally cracked completely. "We were protecting you," she shrieked. "This gold-digging little tramp and her trashy family were trying to take advantage of you." "Take advantage?" Brett's voice rose. "Mother, they paid for this entire party because our check bounced. Emma's sister owns a $50 million company, and you just spent the evening stealing from her." What Mrs. Ashford said next would seal the Ashford family's humiliation. "I don't care if she owns every hotel in America," Mrs. Ashford screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of dignity. "Look at her. She looks like a cleaning lady. She came in through the service entrance. People like us don't associate with people like them." The statement hung in the air like toxic smoke. Even Charles looked horrified by his wife's complete meltdown. "People like us," I repeated thoughtfully. "You mean people who steal from guests at engagement parties? People who file false insurance claims? People who bounce checks and then blame the venues?" Mrs. Ashford's face went white. "How did you—" "I own the hotel, Mrs. Ashford. I have access to all records, all security footage, all communications, including the conversation you had with your insurance company 3 days ago, trying to file a claim for jewelry that was never actually stolen. The insurance fraud revelation would be the final nail in the coffin of the Ashford family's reputation. David stepped forward with yet another document. We also have records of Mrs. Ashford attempting to bill the hotel for damage to personal property that occurred before they ever arrived at the venue. Charles grabbed his wife's arm, his face a mask of panic. Patricia, we need to leave, now. You're not going anywhere, a new voice announced from the ballroom entrance. Detective Sarah Walsh from the Boston Police Department walked into the room, her badge visible on her belt. We received a call about suspected theft and fraud in progress. I hadn't called the police, but David's security protocols included automatic alerts for certain types of incidents. The combination of theft caught on camera and attempted insurance fraud had triggered an immediate response. Emma stared at the unfolding chaos, her perfect engagement party having devolved into a crime scene. I don't understand any of this, she said, her voice small and lost. But Brett's reaction would prove that not everyone was corrupted by their family's values. Emma, Brett said, taking her hands in his, water still dripping from both their clothes. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I thought my parents liked you. I thought they approved of our relationship. They were using you, I said gently to Brett. Your parents are bankrupt. They needed you to marry someone financially stable to keep them afloat. Emma's salary, plus her supposedly wealthy entrepreneur sister, made her the perfect target. Brett turned to face his parents, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and disgust. Is this true? Charles couldn't meet his son's eyes. Mrs. Ashford was arguing with Detective Walsh, demanding to know who had called the police. Son, Charles began, you have to understand, we were just trying to secure your future. By lying to the woman I love, by stealing from her family, by bankrupting your own company through fraud and embezzlement? The mention of embezzlement caught everyone's attention, including Detective Walsh. Embezzlement? Detective Walsh looked up from her notes. David stepped forward again, this time with a thick file folder. Ms. Matthews asked me to conduct a thorough background check when the checks bounced. We discovered that Charles Ashford has been systematically stealing from Ashford Industries' employee pension fund for the past 18 months to fund his lifestyle. The revelation hit Brett like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face going pale. The pension fund, he whispered. Dad, those are people's retirement savings, people who worked for us for decades. Charles's shoulders slumped in defeat. We were going to pay it back. Once you married Emma and we stabilized our finances, you were going to pay back stolen pension funds with my wife's money? Brett's voice was rising to a shout. With money stolen from her family's business? The complete collapse of Brett's worldview was painful to watch, but his character would shine through. Emma reached out to comfort Brett, but he was too lost in his own horror to notice. Mrs. Davies from accounting, he said, almost to himself. She's worked for us for 30 years. She was planning to retire next month. Mr. Peterson in the machine shop, he's got cancer and needs that money for treatment. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Brett fully grasped the magnitude of his parents' crimes. How much? He asked his father. How much did you steal? Charles couldn't answer. Detective Walsh consulted her notes. According to the preliminary investigation, approximately $400,000 over 18 months. Emma gasped. Several guests stepped back, as if the Ashfords' criminality might be contagious. Brett stood up straighter, his shoulders squaring with resolve. Detective Walsh, I want to file a report against my own parents for theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Son, you don't understand. Mrs. Ashford began. No, Mother, you don't understand, Brett cut her off. I understand perfectly. You destroyed our family business to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. You tried to manipulate me into marrying Emma for her money. You spent this entire evening stealing from and insulting the family of the woman I love." But what Brett did next would prove that sometimes good people can emerge from toxic families. He turned to Emma, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Emma, I understand if you never want to see me again. I understand if my family's actions have destroyed any future we might have had." Emma looked at him for a long moment, then at me, then at the chaos surrounding us. "Brett," she said quietly, "did you know any of it? I swear to you, I had no idea. I thought we were successful. I thought my parents liked you. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought I was marrying you because we loved each other, not because you were a financial opportunity." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Even I, with all my cynicism about the Ashford family, could see that Brett had been as much a victim of his parents' deception as Emma had been. Detective Walsh was reading Miranda rights to Charles and Patricia Ashford, their voices blending into the background noise of the ruined party. If this story of family deception and ultimate justice has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe right now, because what happens next will restore your faith in love-conquering family toxicity. Emma looked around the ballroom, taking in the water damage, the scattered guests, the police presence, and the complete destruction of what was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. "Victoria," she said, turning to me with tears in her eyes, "I'm so sorry." "For what?" "For everything. For not recognizing you when you came in. For lying about your success while dismissing it at the same time. For letting you work in the kitchen of your own hotel. For taking credit for your generosity while treating you like you were invisible." The apology I'd waited years to hear came at the worst possible moment, in front of a crowd of witnesses and flashing police cameras. "Emma," I said gently, "we'll talk about all of that later. Right now, let's focus on getting you through tonight." But Emma shook her head. "No, I need to say this now, in front of everyone, because I've been saying the wrong things about you for too long." She turned to address the crowd, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I want everyone here to know that my sister Victoria built a $50 million company from nothing while I was climbing corporate ladders and looking down on her achievements. She paid for this entire party without being asked after my future in-laws bounced their checks. She worked in her own hotel's kitchen tonight rather than embarrass me by correcting the security guard's mistake." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. "And I," Emma continued, her voice cracking, "have spent the last 2 years telling people she runs a little internet business while secretly taking credit for her financial contributions to my life." The public confession was more than I'd ever expected, but Emma wasn't finished. "Victoria, I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't deserve your generosity, but I'm asking for the chance to earn both." I looked at my sister standing there dripping wet in her ruined designer dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect party, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "Emma," I said, "you already have my forgiveness. You always did. I just wanted to feel like I mattered to this family." "You matter," she said fiercely. "You've always mattered. I was just too insecure about my own achievements to acknowledge yours." Brett stepped closer to Emma, his face uncertain. "Does this mean, is there still a chance for us? Not for the financial reasons my parents wanted, but because we actually love each other?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, considering. "Brett, your parents tried to destroy my family's reputation tonight. They stole from me, lied about me, and treated my sister like hired help. But you," she paused, "you stood up to them. You chose justice over family loyalty. You chose truth over comfort. So I think that says everything I need to know about who you really are." The kiss that followed between Emma and Brett, surrounded by police and chaos and the wreckage of lies, was one of the most romantic things I'd ever witnessed. Detective Walsh approached me as the crowd began to disperse and the hotel staff started cleanup efforts. "Ms. Matthews, We'll need a statement about the theft and the bounced checks. Your security footage will be crucial evidence." "Of course," I replied. "David will coordinate with your office to provide everything you need." As the police led Charles and Patricia Ashford away in handcuffs, Mrs. Ashford made one final attempt to maintain her delusions. "This isn't over," she shouted back at us. "People like you don't get to humiliate people like us." "People like us," I called back, "don't need to humiliate anyone. We just tell the truth and let it speak for itself." The aftermath of that night would change everything for everyone involved. 3 hours later, the ballroom was finally empty, except for Emma, Brett, and me. The cleanup crew had dealt with the water damage, the police had finished their investigation, and the last of the guests had gone home with a story they'd be telling for years. We sat at one of the few undamaged tables, still in our wet clothes, sharing a bottle of champagne I'd retrieved from my office. "So," Emma said, raising her glass, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, "you get married if you want to. You build a life with someone who chose you over his family's approval, and maybe you stop apologizing for your sister's success and start celebrating it." Brett looked up from his champagne. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Would you consider hiring me?" The question surprised me. "Hiring you?" "I need to rebuild my life from scratch. My family's business is gone, my parents are going to prison, and I need to find a way to pay back the people they stole from. I have an MBA in hospitality management, and I'm willing to start at the bottom." The request showed more character than I'd expected from someone who'd grown up with silver spoons and trust funds. "I'll consider it," I said, "but you'd really be starting at the bottom. Housekeeping, maybe kitchen prep, no special treatment because you're marrying my sister." "I wouldn't want special treatment," Brett replied. "I want to earn whatever I achieve." Emma reached for my hand across the table. "Victoria, I have a request too." "What's that?" "I want to learn your business. Not to take credit for it, not to use it for my own advancement, but to understand what you've built. Maybe I could work for you too, if you'd have me." I looked at my sister, this woman who'd spent years diminishing my achievements while secretly benefiting from them, and saw something new, genuine respect. "You know," I said slowly, "Grand Meridian could use a director of corporate relations, someone who understands both business operations and public presentation, someone who knows how to manage difficult clients and handle crisis communications." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to earn a job. Just like Brett, you'd start at entry level and work your way up based on performance, not family connections." 6 months later, Emma and Brett had their wedding at the original Grand Meridian property, the small boutique hotel where I'd started my empire. Emma walked down the aisle in a simple dress she'd bought with money she'd earned working as a junior event coordinator. Brett wore a suit he'd purchased with his salary from 6 months as a night auditor and part-time maintenance worker. The guest list was smaller. The Ashfords were in federal prison, and several of Emma's fair-weather friends had distanced themselves after the engagement party scandal. But the people who were there were the ones who mattered, family who supported each other, friends who celebrated success instead of resenting it, and colleagues who learned to respect Emma and Brett for their work ethic rather than their pedigree. During the reception, Emma stood to make a toast. "A year ago," she said, "I thought success meant having the right job, marrying into the right family, and throwing the right parties. I was so focused on appearances that I completely missed the real success story happening right in front of me." She turned to look at me. "My sister Victoria built an empire while I was building a facade. She showed grace under pressure while I was creating pressure for other people. She earned respect through achievement while I was demanding respect through association." But Emma's final words would prove that sometimes the best revenge is helping someone become their best self. Victoria taught me that real success isn't about having the right credentials or the right connections. It's about creating value, treating people well, and earning your achievements through honest work. It's about building something meaningful instead of just appearing successful. The applause was genuine and warm, filled with the approval of people who'd watched Emma transform from entitled corporate climber to humble, hard-working team member. Later, as the reception wound down, Brett found me on the hotel's terrace. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For seeing who I could become, instead of just judging me for who my parents were, for giving me the chance to earn redemption instead of just punishment." I thought about that for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle below us. Brett, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's helping them become better people than they were when they hurt you. A year after that, Emma was promoted to regional events manager, Brett became assistant general manager at our newest property, and the Grand Meridian chain expanded to 22 hotels. More importantly, our family dinners became celebrations of real achievements by people who'd earned them honestly. Dad bragged about Victoria's business expansion to his golf partners. Mom showed Emma's event planning awards to her book club friends. And sometimes, late at night in my corner office overlooking the city I'd conquered one hotel at a time, I thought about that engagement party and smiled. Because the best revenge isn't proving you're better than the people who underestimated you. The best revenge is becoming so successful that their approval becomes irrelevant and their disapproval becomes a badge of honor. Charles and Patricia Ashford served 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. When they were released, they moved to a small apartment in Florida, where Charles works as a hotel maintenance supervisor and Patricia cleans office buildings. They never apologized for that night, but they did send a Christmas card last year with a note. "We understand now why Brett chose Emma's family over ours." That understanding, that recognition of what real character looks like, was worth more than any apology could have been. If this story of family justice and personal triumph has kept you hooked until the very end, absolutely destroy that like button and hit subscribe for more incredible stories of people who turn their pain into power. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest, because everyone deserves to be valued for who they really are, not who others think they should be. Today, when people ask how I built a $50 million empire, I don't talk about business strategies or market analysis. I talk about the night I worked in my own hotel's kitchen, peeling shrimp, while my family celebrated an engagement funded by criminals, and how that night taught me that the most valuable thing you can own isn't property or profits. It's the knowledge that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it, and sometimes the best way to find that knowledge is to let them think you're nobody important, and then show them exactly who you've always been,